going to tackle about virtue ethics. The expected outcome of this lesson are as follows. So, what roles do such virtues play in our own moral life? When you think of the word virtue, it is useful to think of the people you admire, whether it is a friend, a relative, a co-worker, or some celebrity. We usually admire people who are courageous, kind, honest, generous, loyal, diligent, temperate, fair, modest, and hospitable, which shows traits that are good. Virtue ethics and everyday life. The focus on virtue ethics takes a different approach to morality. Rather than asking what we ought to do, virtue ethics ask how we ought to be.
Virtue ethics is concerned with those traits of characters, habits, tendencies, and disposition that makes a person good. In a well-known article, Susan Wolf described a moral saint as a person whose everyday action is as good as possible. That is, who is as morally worthy can be. She also argued that moral saints are not especially happy, since the demand of saintly perfection might include self-sacrifices. Virtue ethics tends to hold that happiness is something different from pleasure. And we're gonna discuss about happiness later on. People can also exhibit bad character traits, and it is what we call vices. Example of vices are cowardness, dishonest, tactless, careless, boorish, stingy, vindictive, disloyal, lazy, and egotistical. And the role of virtue encourages us to develop the good traits and get rid of the vices. Virtues such as courage, loyalty, honesty, and fairness shows up in our interactions with relatives, friends, and co-workers. We often think about virtues when we consider how our behavior serves as a good or bad model for our children, students, and colleagues. So virtue depends in part on our roles and help us fulfill the requirements of our roles. For example, soldiers ought to be courageous and strong, while teachers ought to be patient and kind. So virtue ethics encourage us to think of the question, how could a soldier's virtue differ from those who is a teacher? And that's what we are going to tackle next. Virtues of various vocation and role. There will be overlap among the virtues found in different vocations. Different roles also require different character traits and habits. Enough for us to say that virtue ethics has a pluralistic aspect. There are many different virtues that can be emphasized and integrated in various ways in the life of an individual. Moreover, virtuous people tend to be responsive to the unique demands of various situations. They do the right thing at the right time in the right way, exhibiting a sort of practical wisdom. Virtue ethics can seem imprecise and vague, but keep in mind that the asset of virtue ethics may be its sensitivity to context and recognition of plurality in morals. Excellence, another word that is useful in understanding virtue. The virtues are the things that makes us excellent. They allow us to manifest our highest potential. There are more than one thing that makes us excellent. We just need to embrace and find our own life's virtue. Indeed, virtues often described in plural as a qualities that led to living well. Loyalty is a virtue and so is honesty. A moral philosophy that concentrates on the notion of a virtue is called a virtue of ethics. Virtue ethics enables our moral life in developing good characters. It is about determining the ideals of human life and trying to embody these ideals in one's own life. The virtues are ways in which we embody these ideals. For example, if we consider honesty to be such an ideal, then we ought to be and try to become honest person. Next of our discussion is Sir Aristotle. Aristotle was born on 384 BCE in Stagira, northern Greece. So, what is Aristotle's contribution to ethics? One of these is his book entitled Nicomachean Ethics, which is named after his son's name, Nicomachus, where the basic notion of what he wrote about moral theory can be found. As noted in chapter 7, Aristotle was one of the earliest writers to ground morality in nature, and specifically in human nature. Morality and ethics also stress notion of virtue. For Aristotle, virtue was an excellence of some sort. Virtue comes from the Latin word vir, which is referred to strength or manliness. For Aristotle's Greek translation, virtue was arit, translated as excellence. And according to Aristotle, there are two basic types of virtue or excellence. First is the intellectual virtue. Intellectual virtue or excellence of mind, the ability to understand, reason, and judge well. While the other is moral virtue. Moral virtue disposes us to act, virtues that are learned through repetition. For example, if you have a moral virtue of honesty, it will be easy for you to be honest. It becomes a habitat or a second nature to him or her. The same thing applies to the opposite of virtue, which is vice. If you are vice of lying, then it will be easy for you to lie and be hard for you to tell the truth. And these bad habitats are difficult to change or weak. Do you ever wonder of your vices that's slowly taking over you? It is never too late naman to change those, diba? Aristotle's philosophy outlined a variety of particular virtues including courage, temperance, justice, pride, and magnanimity. Moving on to virtue as a mean. Aristotle also provides a unifying framework for understanding virtue in general, as a mean between extremes. The idea is occasionally known as the golden mean. By saying virtue is a mean, we usually refer to how it is used in mathematics. Mathematical word means, which means average. To better understand the idea that virtue is a mean, take the following example. The virtue of courage can be understood as a mean between extremes of deficiency and extremes of excess. The virtue of courage has to do with fear. When facing danger or challenge, we either have too much fear, which makes us unable to act, or too little fear, which makes us take reckless or foolish risks, while too much fear is called cowardice. The virtue of courage is having just the right amount of fear. The other virtues can be seen as mean between extremes as indicated in the following table. Next is cardinal virtues. There are 4 cardinal virtues. These are prudence or wisdom, justice, temperance, and courage. Moving on to nature, human nature, and the human good. Aristotle noticed that seeds of the same sort always grew to the same mature form. He opened developing eggs of various species and noticed that these organisms manifested a pattern in their development even before birth. He concluded that there are order in nature. Natural beings such as plants and animals had a principle of order within them that directed them toward their goal, their mature and final form. This view can be called teleological views. From the Greek word telos meaning goal, it was from this conclusion that Aristotle developed his notion of the good. According to Aristotle, the good is that at which all things aim. Good things are things that fulfill some purpose and or goal. Thus, example, the good of a shipbuilder is building ship. He then asked whether there is anything that is the good of the human being. Before we can finally answer this question, we must first talk about what it is to be human. According to Aristotle, natural beings come in the kind or species. From their species flows their essential characteristics and certain key tendencies or capabilities. For example, the squirrel. It can run along telephone wires and gather and store nuts for its food. From the characteristics that define a squirrel, we were able to identify what a good squirrel is. A good squirrel is one that is effective, successful, and functions well. In fact, that it have a good balance and know how to find and store its food. Just like how Aristotle thought of human beings as natural beings with specific characteristics and abilities that we share as humans. But unlike squirrels, human beings can choose to act in the service of their good or act against it. The question now is, what about human beings? Is there something comparable for the human being as human? Or is there some good for human as humans? As far as we can tell what a good squirrel is, the same should be true for the human being. For human beings to function well, they should perfect their human capabilities. If they do this, they will also be happy. For being happy is the extent that it is functioning well. Aristotle believed that the ultimate good of humans is happiness, blessedness, or prosperity. The Greek word for this sort of happiness is eudaimonia. Eudaimonia should not be compared or confused with the word pleasure. Example, a coward who is afraid of danger is reluctant to experience pain. And a courageous person may have to forego pleasure and submit to pain, including the pain of being killed. Aristotle warned us that pleasure can distract us from what is good. Eudaimonia aims at a kind of happiness that is deeper and longer lasting than mere pleasure. Eudaimonia comes from the Greek word eu means good and daimonia meaning spirit or soul. Thus, Aristotle's idea is that virtue produces happiness of having a good soul or spirit which fulfills essential human function or purposes. Next question. Is there anything unique to human? An essentially human function or purpose? Aristotle believed that it is our rational element that is peculiar to us. Rational elements has two different functions. One is to know and one is to guide choices and action. One is to know, which means we must develop our ability to know the worth and the truth. While one is to guide choices and actions, which means we must also choose wisely, and we will be functioning well specifically as humans. So, are you human enough?
Mario Vega Tonsalata from BSED Mathematics, and thank you for watching this video. I hope you learned something new.